Coming on the crowded booth with Bryce Coon.
Happy Monday. We say hello to you, Ralph Leary and Bryce Coon. We are so glad to be back with you on a fantastic week. Ralph, we're officially in the middle of September. How was your weekend? It was full of college football, as I'm sure. You weathered the bad weather that we had down here in the Southeast, especially in the Georgia area. But first off, man, we're going to dive into two games specifically. But overall, how good does it feel to be kind of now in the midst of college football season?
Man, it was a great weekend of football. We saw a lot of huge games and a lot closer games than we expected, honestly. And not a lot of huge upsets this weekend. I feel like the big upset was one we'll talk about a little bit. It wasn't even an upset; it was just more of a shocking final score. Overall, it was a great weekend of football. I thought there was some all the big games really stepped up to what they were supposed to be, and everyone came to play. I feel like, except for maybe a few teams.
A few teams didn't show up to play. We're going to dive into some of those games. We're going to talk a little bit about Florida versus Alabama. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Auburn Tigers heading up to Happy Valley. They didn't leave happy, but they left with, I think, a lot of things they can take away that fans could be happier about as the season progresses. But first off, we want to invite you to, Ralph, once again, this is our second week of having this layout. So let's tell people where to go. Right below Ralph, you have thecrowdedbooth.com. You check us out right there. We have weekly content coming out. Not only is it just, Ralph, college stuff, it's also local stuff as well, as high school season is in full effect as well. Follow us down on social media right here. Facebook, if you're watching on Facebook, we appreciate you watching. Twitter, I know people are watching on there. Follow us on Instagram. Right after this show concludes, we're going to have our weekly power rankings. Ralph, you haven't seen them yet. I'm going to text them to you during one of our commercial breaks, and then I just want to get your reaction for the people watching because it's a big shakeup. It's a big shakeup in the power rankings. I'll say this, Ohio State is nowhere in my top 10. I don't have them anywhere in the top 10.
Either.
Not in yours either. But no, listen, we're excited to bring you another great show. If you're watching, like we said, Facebook, also on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Hit that little bell for notifications so you can know when we go live. Monday and Wednesday with the Crowded Booth Live, we've also launched our specialty show, which is solo hosting, but Ralph is behind the screen producing it. Did a great job last week with Swarm Talk, talking all about Georgia Tech. We've got a special guest whose birthday was today. Former Georgia Tech quarterback Taquan Marshall is going to be coming on the show tomorrow to talk about Ralph. And let's lead off with this right here, actually. Before we get to Alabama, Florida, and before we get to Auburn, Penn State, Georgia Tech. We're going to talk about it more in depth. Ralph, I may let you feature in a the Bear type of role on the Storm Talk. It may just come to you a couple times. What was quickly maybe one or two of your big takeaways from what happened? Because Georgia Tech hung around, and they had a chance to win that game in the end. Clemson, though, is it more of – and I'll say this for our viewers tomorrow. For me, it's going to be – we're going to talk specifically about how Georgia Tech showed resiliency after really not doing much of anything, and their defense played well. But Clemson has a lot of major issues. Zach McKinnell already read the comment over on YouTube. Ohio State and Clemson have been atrocious. They have major issues. Ralph, talk about some of those issues. What is wrong with the Clemson Tigers?
I just don't think their offense is clicking on all cylinders right now. They were so used to Trevor Lawrence and how good he's been in the past and, being comfortable with him at quarterback. And DJ has stepped in, and he has really kind of, missed that shot that he had and what we thought he could be. And I feel like the hype got to him too quick, and it just he's just lost it. He doesn't look like he was last year when he played against Notre Dame in the regular season matchup, not the ACC championship game, but he just did not look the same as he did. Their defense still looks stout to me. Obviously, they played Georgia, lost a very close game, but did not allow a touchdown. Almost lost to Georgia Tech, but didn't allow a touchdown though. So Clemson's defense is doing exactly what they need to do. Their offense though is the only problem with their what's going on right now there. And Ohio State is the exact opposite. Offense is there, defense is definitely not. Obviously, they won Saturday. They didn't. It wasn't a close game at the end, but for most part of the game, it was too close for comfort against Tulsa. And when you have a team that's throwing, a quarterback was almost 1,000 yards so far, and a running back who had almost 300 yards on the ground, you shouldn't have close games.
Yeah,
and especially if you're considered the number 9 team in the country, you shouldn't have a close game unless you're playing a real decent team. And with how the season's looking so far for one team in the Big Ten, being Michigan, that Ohio State-Michigan game is looking a lot better.
That's true.
Before the end of the season, and I say it right now, as of right now, Michigan might win that game.
I like that. That's something that a lot of people hadn't talked about. Michigan, Jim Harbaugh said, we can run the ball, and sometimes we'll find different avenues to do that. They can run the ball very well. The big game is going to be huge. Obviously, Michigan, Ohio State, one of the great rivalries in college sports. You talked about Clemson, their struggles. I think it's safe to say that they're out of my top 4. Obviously, for a lot of people, Ohio State is not in there right now. AJ Ingram already over on there on Facebook. Bro, Iowa is winning the Big Ten. The Big Ten is going to have a fun time. I think one thing we haven't talked about, and we're going to talk about them right now, the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State versus Auburn, Ralph. Let's touch on this right here. Penn State, and I want to say this too for the viewers. If I sound very nasally, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, but that's okay. But Penn State, Ralph, defended Happy Valley. And listen, this was this whole whiteout thing, they were just 500 in all time in whiteouts. It wasn't like whiteout was this big thing, but they did a good job. Now, also, Auburn played a fantastic ball game. This was, we put on there Zach McKinnell with another one right there. We're going to talk about him a little bit later on. He came on the show last Monday, a week ago today, and said, Bo Nix is going to have to step up. He is. And he did, in my opinion. He showed what we thought he could be, Ralph. So when you looked at this game, I know you got to watch it in full. I watched the end of it and then went back and watched some of the big plays. Bo Nix stepped up, but how impressed were you with Penn State in their efforts?
Well, I thought Penn State looked really good. Offensively, they were clicking on all cylinders. I thought Sean Clifford looked really good. Was able to sit in the pocket for long enough, and when he didn't have a chance to throw it, he was running the ball very well. But like Zach and I said last week, and I went off what Zach said, is Noah Cain didn't show much to me beginning of the year, and he didn't show much to me on Saturday night. I felt like Auburn's defense really stopped the run really well. Overall, I felt like Penn State's defense looked really good. I mean, they were causing problems in Auburn's backfield. They were causing problems when they're running screens. They were stopping all the big plays. Didn't lay anything good over top of them, honestly. I felt like overall it was a great game, though. It was college game day. The hype was there. The whiteout was real. And I've always said this now. Every time Penn State has a whiteout game, they're playing Ohio State or Michigan usually. So, they're usually not in a favorable chance. But, they played a team that has coming off a rough year last year, a new coach, some struggles at certain positions. And I felt like they had a great chance to really win this game. They did. Overall, though, I mean, like I said, it was a great game. Auburn didn't get the outcome they wanted, but you walk out of here with your head held high because you played very well against a very good Big Ten team. And, Auburn could be a team that might upset someone this year if they're not looking, if you're not, paying attention. So,
well, they have the schedule to do it. We're going to talk a little bit about Auburn's schedule here in a second. AJ Ingram brings up another great point here, Ralph. Auburn had zero pressure on Clifford. He played the game of his life. And listen, you talked about Clifford, his ability to be able to progress through his reads. And like Zach said, he hit his man Jahan Dotson, 10 receptions, 78 yards. Britton Strange, 4 receptions, 71 yards. And when you look at the numbers, 28 of 32, just 4 incompletions. One of those, Ralph, was an interception, over 300 yards total in passing. Dotson had that one pass for 22 yards, but 288 from Clifford. I mean, this was a performance in Clifford where a lot of talk, especially here in the Southeast, was how would Bo Nix step up? Well, a lot of talk up in Big Ten country was you have an SEC team coming into your stadium, into your home, that supposedly is supposed to be this fast dynamic defense. And I'll say Penn State's offensive line played well. They protected Sean Clifford, and he delivered the ball well to his weapons. To me, this was just a classic game of two really good teams. I wouldn't call either of these teams elite, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. I don't know if there's maybe one singular elite team in college football all around right now, but these are two really good programs. These are two programs, Ralph, that I think we both could say could make a case, and especially maybe Penn State more than Auburn, because due to the scheduling, could make a case for a New Year's Six bowl. That's something interesting to see. Zach McKinnell back here on YouTube. He said, don't let Bo Nix off the hook. Only 5 yards per attempt will never be good enough to beat a top 10 team. And that's something interesting too, Ralph. At some point, you got to feel like you can stretch the field. We talked about this wide receiving core. I feel like Auburn tried to do that, but Penn State did a good job of really kind of playing a prevent type of defense and saying, we're not going to let you beat us deep. We're eliminating the big play.
I want to say one thing, though, is Auburn was 10 of 17 on third down. And that's probably one of the best, in general, you've seen in the past few years for Auburn, and especially with Gus Malzahn having the offense not really converting on third downs. And I felt like Auburn did a very good job there on Saturday in a very tough environment, and it was loud. I mean, Auburn only, I think, it had 2 false starts all night that I can remember. I could be wrong on that one, but for a team that who wants you to have problems with communication, I think Auburn communicated very well. Had a few mistakes. The Kobe Hudson fumbled really kind of shattered their whole drive because it was the first play of the drive, and you felt bad for a young guy like him. But Auburn, I feel like Auburn responded very well to some big plays that Penn State had. But overall, I think there's one thing we all need to talk about is how bad the officiating was.
Yeah, the officiating was pretty rough in general. From obviously going to the targeting call that I think just as a whole, if you're going to call targeting, let's start. Let's finish the game, then we'll talk about this because it kind of goes hand in hand. First off, you had the third down punt from Penn State that's something it's different from the target. That's just like elementary, like knowing the rules that you have to be able to know that on that intentional grounding call.
Just knowing the down for one.
Yeah, that's completely different. Before we get to the rest of the officiating, I want to bring up this comment. Zach McKinnell, we also have to address the worst play call of the season on 4th and 2. You have the best running back in the country. You let Bo Nix throw a low percentage fade on the short side of the field. And I'll say this too. I know he's a local guy. You're throwing it over there to Kobe Hudson. Kobe Hudson is more of a slot type of receiver. He's not – and listen, he's a fantastic athlete. It's a guy that played quarterback in high school, Ralph. But he's not the kind of guy that you would think is going to go for the jump ball in this necessarily. Yeah. So when I saw this, and I saw it in real time, I was down in front of my TV watching this, it did come into question. A lot of times you felt like the offensive line had played well for Auburn. They were getting a push up front. I don't remember what the numbers for Tank Bigsby on the game were, and 23 carries, 102 yards. So he's averaging 4.4 yards per carry. Ralph, they ran the ball for 182 yards. The team averaged 182 yards on the ground.
Yeah.
Now, listen, Brian Harsin said today in his press conference, I know how everyone's going to feel about that because of the way it turned out. If it turned out the other way, no one would have said anything.
I agree.
Obviously, hindsight's 20/20, but would you have run the ball right there? Do you feel like that was the higher percentage, or are you okay with kind of letting the chips fall where they may lie?
At first, I was okay with that back corner fade. I really did think it was a good play at first. I feel like there should have been a penalty on it, though. I feel like Kobe Hudson was brought down too early of a chance. I know people were saying that there was no chance you caught the ball, but in my opinion, you don't know until you're given that chance. But then again, I wouldn't have mind having you bring a full offensive line set up, have a fullback and two tight ends in there, and just run up the middle. Auburn ran the ball very well. Tank was running very well. You could have had a Jarquez Hunter and Tank Bigsby back there behind them, or with Bo. You could have ran some kind of option play, and I felt like that was just something they just missed out on. And they're going to learn from it. Obviously, this was a big learning game for Auburn. They learned a lot about themselves in a huge game, a huge atmosphere against a very talented team. I think Jarquez Hunter and Tank Bigsby are the best running back duo in college football. They both showed it on Saturday night. Obviously, Bigsby had the majority of carries, but when Hunter stepped up, he was talented as well. But yeah, there's questions like you just said. What Harsin said though is if it happened the other way around, no one questions it. And I'm the same way. If they would have scored, you don't say anything was wrong with it, but they didn't. So you question why do that. So I'm fine with running the ball there. I think either play would have worked, honestly. But then again, you question it because it didn't work out.
I guess you're right. Questioning, I do feel like maybe it's a lower percentage opportunity there. Maybe, and you talked about the running the ball. I mean, you talked about Hunter. I mean, he had 9 carries, 63 yards. Bo Nix in his own right, 6 carries for 29 yards. I mean, this was something, Ralph, where to me, and maybe I'm playing too much of NCAA 14. The zone read. I would have gone maybe zone read right here. Give the option to if Bo Nix. If you're going to say Bo Nix is the quarterback of your team, your program, and I'm going to use an NFL term, your franchise QB for Auburn, put the decision-making on him. Is he going to stick it in the belly of Tank Bigsby, or is he going to pull it out and go around the end and try to score that touchdown? Obviously, like you said, though, Ralph, the big thing is it worked out. It didn't work out in the way they wanted it to, but there were some missed opportunities elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, the game didn't just come down to that moment. And I'm one of those big believers that as much as there's these big moments in college football, it never really comes down to that's the reason we lost the game or that's the reason we won the game. There's things leading up to. Now, there's big defining plays, but for this right here, I feel like Auburn taking it away, walking away, you lose this one, a tough battle. To me, if you're an Auburn fan, man, you got to feel good because this is a team we talked about all spring and summer. They may be lucky to get to 7 or 8 wins. And now I'm in the camp, Ralph, where I like how the AP poll came out. They only dropped them a spot. Yeah, I like that. They should stay in the top 25.
And they competed on the road. And that's what I think Auburn was really concerned about was can we compete in hostile environments on the road? And I think you did. And you have to go to LSU and Ole Miss this year. So you got 2 hostile environments you got to get into and, play your best football. And I like what Zach says. I think Auburn has such a bright future. I agree. I really do because I think Harson's got the right mindset. He came in, played the best. They played as best as they could. A few mistakes. You're not always perfect. Look at Alabama, Florida. No one was perfect in that game. So it happens. You learn a lot from your team here. You can take some plays out of your playbook, add some plays in that playbook. Defensively, you can change a few things around. I do think Auburn's defense played really well. Obviously, I think the targeting call was horrible. I'm not trying to be biased about it at all. If you want to argue with me, that's fine. It wasn't targeting to me. I think McClain did exactly what he had to do to stop the play. And people can argue saying, well, he should have been brought down in the first place. Well, sorry. Football players make football plays, and he has to dive for the end zone. So, overall, Auburn played really well. I gave him an A. I gave him an A- or an A overall in this game because I wasn't expecting that much out of him in the first place. So, overall, though, like Zach just said, mentality and energy is huge for Auburn. I think they got the right thing going. You're muted.
Yeah, I think. Thank you, Ralph. You appreciate. I think the big thing is that hey, Ralph, that's why you have the producing capabilities. No, you can. It wouldn't let me you, by the way. You look at what Zacob McClain did. I mean, that play right there. What is he supposed to do?
Yeah, I mean,
you and I were texting each other, and I was stopped at the gas station in Noonan, and so I didn't see it. I was listening to the radio, and I think I texted you and said, "Well, Andy, talking about Andy Burcham, said that it might have been targeting get hit with the helmet." But then when I got home and watched it and saw the clip, and I think you sent it to me, I mean, there was no way, in my opinion, that was a targeting call. I mean, listen, I understand is the thing I understand. This rule has to be changed in some form or fashion because the idea of a rule to keep players safe, I'm all for that. Let's keep them safe. But when you're asking players, we've said this multiple times on the show, to slow down what they're doing, that's when guys get hurt. Mm-hmm. When you slow down and start to think about everything in the game of football, that's when you start to get hurt. So very something interesting to watch. And right there, what is he supposed to do? Just let him score? I mean, if a guy, what was the clip that you sent me? I think it might have been on TikTok or something like that. And yes, our viewers will know that we do watch TikTok. But it was a guy like literally left his feet and launched himself at the quarterback. That's targeting.
That's targeting. But
when a ball carrier lowers his body, you no longer have anywhere to hit.
If you have intent on harming someone in the play, that is targeting.
Yes.
But that should be the definition. If your intent is to launch your head at their head, that's targeting. If you lower your shoulder pad and they stop them and their shoulder pad hits their head, that's not targeting. Mm-hmm. That's called football. And obviously these referees never played football because they don't understand anything.
It was an SEC crew when they head to Jordan-Hare next year. When they go there, it's going to be a Big Ten crew in Jordan-Hare. That's part of the home and home agreement that was made in place. So it'll be very interesting to watch. One more comment from Zach McKenna before we turn our attention to Florida, Alabama. The secondary is something I'm concerned about, though. Smoke Monday got caught flat-footed way too many times. Ralph, you look at the rest of Auburn's schedule, and I'm going to talk you through this real quick. They do play home against Georgia State, which is a very winnable game. But, Ralph, from October 2nd to arguably November 6th, a little over a month, they enter an absolute gauntlet of schedules. Absolute gauntlet of schedules. We have two more comments we're going to get to. They're going on the road at LSU. Haven't won there since 1999. I don't care. And I know LSU's not what they are used to. We'll get these right here from Lisa. Hey, Ralph. And then Richard Leary, I love what you said. Inside the 5-yard line, you have to run straight up, no diving to the goal line. Also, shout out Richard Leary with the amazing theme song for the Crowded Booth. We appreciate him on that right there. We'll get his MLF in at some point, obviously, because he obviously is helping out the show as well. But going back to that, at LSU, Ralph, I don't care how bad LSU is, that's a hostile environment.
Yeah.
LSU could elevate their level of play because it is a rivalry game.
It's also a night game in Death Valley.
Yeah, 9 p.m. Eastern kickoff they have that one set at, which is very late. Then you host Georgia. Then you host Georgia, who right now probably has, numbers-wise, the best defense in the country. And I don't know if that's even close. You go to Arkansas, which Arkansas might be a little beat up before that.
Yeah,
But it's a physical team. You host Ole Miss, and then you go on the road to Texas A&M. Now, Ralph, I'm saying also to say is that this is where the depth of Auburn will be tested with that schedule, because it's one thing to face 2 to 3 opponents that are tough. To go a month straight of facing opponents within the top 16, Ralph, I mean, this Penn State game would have been good to win, but I think this is why a lot of people felt like Auburn might max out at 7 to 8 wins this season, maybe because of that depth right there. Richard Leary once again saying, yes, Zach McKinnell, plus that game is 8 p.m. Central in Death Valley. I'm terrified. So, Ralph, when you look at the schedule and you round it out with, and I won't even say Mississippi State's technically a walkthrough, because, listen, Mike Leach could just have them put up 60 points and no one knows. They do play South Carolina, and then obviously play Alabama in the season. When you look at the schedule, Ralph, real quick before we go to commercial, I mean, it doesn't get any easier for Auburn. There's no doubt about it. How will this depth of Auburn hold up? We know that the front line of defense is very, very good, offensively and defensively. They got a lot of talent. But depth-wise, are they built to withstand a month's worth of games against some very physical competition? I mean, if they get out of there 2-2, I think it is. Let's say they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If they get out of there 2-3 or 3-2, that's perfect. 4-1, holy cow! 5-0.
One loss probably coming to Georgia, right?
Yeah. If you get out of there going 3-2, man, that's big, and that means you won some big time road games.
Yeah, and I think the big one obviously is LSU. You go to LSU, you haven't won there since what, 1999, like you said.
Yes.
You got to play your best game. I mean, honestly, no matter how good they are or how bad they are, because when they play at home, they are a different team for some reason. So that's where you learn about yourself a little bit more, because obviously you have Penn State. You watch yourself play a very good team on the road in a very hostile environment. Well, guess what? You come home for a weekend against Georgia State, who has been very good in the past, but struggled this year, and will be playing a new quarterback this weekend. But then you go back to a hostile environment again. So you get a week of a hostile, a week off of that, back to a hostile environment, and your depth will really show, because your offensive line, your defensive line are going to be worn out. And then when you're worn out like that, you come back home and you hit to host Georgia, who was just, and I think Shane Beamer said it best. There's like 105 5 stars on the other side of the ball against us, and we have probably about 2 of them. There's a defensive lineman who runs faster than most people do, at 360 pounds. You're muted still.
345, 350, yes.
Yeah. So this is where Auburn. This is the gut check, really. Are you really about it this year, or are you just going to be like, okay, we beat some lower level teams this year, and we lost 8 to Penn State. This is your gut check. Are you really going to be something in the future, or are you going to be get walked over the next few weeks? So Auburn's got to play their best football, penalty-free football. Honestly, that's one thing that Brian Harsin, I think, is very good at. He wants to lower penalties for this team. And I think they had a pretty good job of that this past weekend. I didn't see a lot of holding calls, a lot of personal fouls or anything. I think they're very well maintained in that situation. And I want to say it was I watched the Seahawks game. They had 100 yards in penalties on Sunday. So
that won't cut it.
Yeah, that's not where you're going to win games. So overall, they've really got to play their best football this week, the next few weeks. Sorry.
Auburn's going to have tough task to hang out for them. Zach McKinnell, Arkansas is supposedly missing 2 to 3 starting offensive linemen this weekend. They're playing Texas A&M in Jerry's World. That's going to be interesting to watch as well. And then Lisa White, 99, is a real man who is quick as a cat. Ralph, he's going to be making a lot of money, Jordan Davis, in the NFL. He is going to be very good. And then I like this as well. This is what helps Auburn. I'm counting on the magic of Jordan Hare. Lots of home games this year may help. Richard Lee right there. Listen, we're going to take a break right here. We're going to hear from Cook's Hot Dogs. You got to check them out. Ralph and I are going to go at some point this week. It's a great place to eat, great environment. You enjoy doing it. We grew up on it, and that's why we're doing what we're doing today. Isn't that right, Ralph?
Yes, sir.
Exactly. We'll be right back after this.
Cook's Place began serving our signature hot dogs in 1985 from a cart on Broadway. We still serve the best hot dogs and scrambled dogs in town at the corner of Moon and Miller Road and at the landings. Our friendly staff won't let you leave hungry. Come in and eat to the beat with our 50s jukebox. Cook's Place, fast service, great people, awesome food. What are you waiting for?
Back here on the Crowded Booth Live, Bryce Good alongside Ralph Leary, the duo that's going to be bringing it to you every single Monday and Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. If you want to tune in, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If you're following on all of those right now, this is what you do to know that we are live. If you're watching on Facebook, go to our page, like it, set up notifications for posts. We're posting all the time on there. If you are on Twitter, follow, set up those notifications as well. Make sure we know when we go live. And then as well on YouTube, subscribe. Keep going there. Ralph, I think we're at like 140 subscriptions on YouTube. We have over 700-something followers on Instagram, continuing to grow that as well. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about this because the state of Alabama had some interesting football games, including your Troy Trojans who dominated as well. We'll give a quick shout-out to them. Alabama and Florida. Now, this was a game through the first 15 to 20 minutes of game time.
Yeah.
It looked like this was going to be another one of those games where, holy cow, Alabama is the real deal. This is going to be unreal. But then Florida comes back. Emory Jones puts on a fantastic game. I don't know if I've seen this, and that left me speechless. That's why I had to take a break right there because the trenches, Alabama got beat up front on both sides of the football, offense and defense, badly.
Yes.
Ralph, what was your biggest takeaway? Was this more of what Alabama isn't, or is it more of what Florida might be?
I really want to get – I know obviously Dan Mullen will never see this, and I've always been the kind of like not really favorite of Dan Mullen, but shout out to Dan Mullen for sticking with their gut call at Emory Jones at quarterback and rolling with the whole game because he struggled at first. But, if you look at his passing stats, which is an average game, 18 of 28, 195, and an interception. But talk about a guy who ran the ball 19 times for 77 yards and a touchdown, who helped lead their team with 245 rushing yards, took some huge shots, honestly, during the game, and led this team to a 2-point loss to the number one team in the country. They weren't even they were a 14.5-point underdog in this game. Florida showed up. They won the game in the trenches. They dominated Alabama's defense, honestly. I felt like Alabama's defense didn't know how to tackle, for one. That was the most surprising thing. Alabama's defense could not tackle at all. And I felt that it was just a sloppy game for Alabama. They did not play to the standards that we hold them to, honestly. And that's weird saying because we're holding them to a national championship contender every single season, and I did not think they played that level this past weekend. And honestly, you were there last weekend against Mercer. Mm-hmm. They didn't look that good either. So yeah, I don't know if there's something going on internally or they just don't show up on game days. So, and
it's interesting because Nick Saban has been saying it for 3 weeks. Hey, listen, there's a lot of things we need to work on. And I think the first 2 weeks of the season, everyone kind of just felt like, well, it's okay, Ralph, because it's okay because they're just rolling over opponents. They they beat the brakes off Miami. They take care of FCS level Mercer, but then you get into a game against a high-profile opponent in a very big-time environment. I mean, let's don't forget how big time of an environment Florida is in Gainesville, the Swamp. I mean, that's one of the toughest places to play in college football. And Alabama struggled. Like you said, they struggled to tackle. They struggled up front. And, Ralph, that's something that we really haven't seen in a very long time. And so that begs the question, and going back to it, I think the final number on this, and I want to make sure I get this right, total yards, 440 for Florida, just 331 for Alabama. Ralph, that breaks a streak of 22 games where Alabama has gained at least 400 yards on offense.
Wow.
That shows you how good they've been. Now, listen, I think we all took for granted of maybe so through the first two games of, yeah, they lost Mac Jones, they lost Devontae Smith, they lost Jayden Waddle, they lost 2-3 NFL-style linemen, they lost Najee Harris, but they got all these guys, and this is just what Nick does. Yeah. You're right, that is what Nick does. But listen, Bryce Young is still, no pun intended, a young player. He's a young quarterback. He's had very limited experience. While I think he's very, very talented, and we talked about after week one matchup against Miami, there's going to be some growing pains. Now, the good news for Alabama fans, you get to go through the growing pains in a win. It's a lot better than going through those growing pains of a loss. So for this game right here, I was impressed with how Florida came back. But, Ralph, I said it earlier and alluded to it, I don't know if there's a team that doesn't have maybe if you had – and we'll look at this here in a second or after the show at the power rankings. I don't know if there's a team that you can look at and say – there's not a weakness here. I think every team has a weakness right now, and that's something obviously could be worked out by week 12. But for Alabama right here, it wasn't, like you said, the Alabama we've seen in previous seasons.
Yeah, it was a very shocking game for Alabama fans, and I feel like some fans were really kind of, I think some fans could have walked away happy because, that Alabama's not robotic, honestly. And I'm saying that because they're not repetitive every year. They're just dominating everybody. You got to have those close wins to make your team better. You got to work those, like you said, growing pains out. You got to find what's wrong with your team, what you're doing wrong on the field, and work with it. I felt this Florida game was a huge eye-opener for Alabama. And you get Southern Miss at home next week or this upcoming weekend, but then the following weekend, you got Lane Train coming into town who has the most high-scoring offense right now. And talking about Matt Corral, who had 7 touchdowns in the first half. Okay? If you can't stop Florida from running the ball and occasionally dropping a few passes on you, you're not going to stop this offense. And it will be a huge eye-opener if they lose to Ole Miss again at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's a team where you can't make the mistakes. Ralph, here's a common theme we're seeing right now. Versus Florida, they had 11 penalties for 75 yards.
Yeah.
Go back to the Mercer game. They had, let's make sure we get this right, 9 penalties for 95 yards. Against Miami week 1, they had 8 penalties for 81 yards. Ralph, this is a team that's not playing very disciplined football right now. That's going to get you in trouble against a team that can take advantage of it. I think the problem on Saturday was Florida would have won that game. They just dug themselves a hole way too early on.
Yeah, and a lot of people are saying that Anthony Richardson should have played for Florida and they would have had a better chance. I don't think so. I think Emory Jones did as best as he could. He had a few mistakes early on, but he really answered back with great runs. Really opened the field up, got him in scoring position, helped the team win. I mean, he was a leader on the field, and that's what you wanted. That's what you wanted to see if you're Dan Mullen. But yeah, overall though, Florida played well. Alabama struggled. They had their great first quarter. I mean, like you said, the first 15, 20 minutes of the game, I thought, man, Alabama's going to steamroll this team.
Mm-hmm.
And, you just never know with college football, man.
It's such a weird beast, Ralph. I think that's the best way to say. It's so weird. You don't quite know what you're going to get. And you looked at an offense that, Bryce Young, he had a little trouble making some decisions at some times. He struggled a little bit with some of that. We talked about that game. It's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. Obviously, the team we're going to talk about here finally in Georgia, Georgia looks at their schedule a little bit differently now, Ralph, because now they see Auburn, who will probably be ranked in the top 25 if they don't lose these next 2 games. Mm-hmm. They see Florida, but Florida already has a conference loss, which helps Georgia if they were to stumble in Jacksonville. But, Ralph, this is a Georgia team that put up almost 500 yards of total offense, would have if they didn't kneel out the rest of the clock against South Carolina. And, Ralph, I'll say this too. You know my background. I know your background, so I know they're differing on the teams we've discussed here tonight. But I think we can both say early on, even in that win over UAB, Georgia struggled. They didn't look like they did with running the football as they have in years past. It didn't look like that. Well, that was not an issue. 184 yards rushing. They had 5.9 yards per rush. They did a fantastic job, 9 of 12 on third downs. Oh, and then JT Daniels also said, I'm going to show y'all why I should be the starting quarterback, threw for over 300 yards. I mean, if Georgia played – now, listen, it's against South Carolina. But if Georgia – if they gain steam, and I'm telling you, that Auburn-Georgia game is going to be a collision course. When you look at some of the top teams in the country right now, I mean, Alabama still garnered, some number one picks for obvious reason. Georgia, I think, got 3 first-place votes. I don't know if there's anybody close underneath that. You mentioned Iowa. I don't know how Iowa would – we don't have a common opponent, at least until, I guess, Iowa plays Penn State. We can compare how Iowa played Penn State when Georgia plays Auburn. Auburn plays Penn State.
Exactly.
But I don't know what it's going to look like, to be honest with you, because there's not, to me, a team at the top that you can say they don't have any flaws. Alabama's struggling with discipline and tackling. Georgia, we don't really know what they have offensively. We know they have an amazing defense. And I guess, Ralph, we should go ahead and give a knock on the defense for Georgia. They did give up their first touchdown, so there is that. But the defense is outscoring opposing offenses 16-7. What is your viewpoint for the rest of the season? I mean, this is something that I like it. I mean, it's kind of cool to see because you really don't know who that Final Four could end up as. Oklahoma's obviously not themselves. Ohio State is not as good. Penn State vaults themselves up in the rankings. I mean, this is a little bit of parity going on this season.
You know what? Let's just throw every 4 there are 4 teams in there every week, and we'll just kind of guess at the end of the year. Honestly, I don't know either. No one's really shown out this year. Ohio State hasn't done it much. Oregon struggled in week 1 against Fresno State. Fresno State beat UCLA. I don't know what's going on anymore. Oregon beat Ohio State week 2. Ohio State struggled the rest of the year. So I don't know who the top 4 are. I know one thing: Georgia has the best defense in the country. They have a electric offense if they let JT Daniels play, and unlike adding Stetson Bennett in there for one pass, he throws an interception. Why? I understand that he's earned his reps, but not middle of the game. Yeah, I think that was just a bad call. Yeah. It looks bad on Kirby. As much as I like Kirby as a coach, I think that's just kind of a dumb thing to do. Don't take JT.
It was a little puzzling.
Yeah, and the first quarter it happened.
Well, it was almost like they were doing the thing where sometimes you see a guy gets 2 drives and then you switch off to another 2 and 1, 2 1 2 1, which I didn't like that because Daniels. I mean, you go back to his numbers right there. As we're going to get that comment right there: 23 of 31, 303 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. The interception was ill-fated. He said he shouldn't have thrown it. He didn't see the guy. That sometimes those kind of plays happen. But let's see right here. Georgia has some weak links in the secondary. Was exposed with a long ball a few times. They need to shore that up. When some of our receivers get well, it's a brand new game. Lisa, I love what you said right there because they were exposed with a long ball. That was one concern. South Carolina found some success there. And I think the big question going the rest of the way, Ralph, for Georgia's defense is going to be, can the front 7 mask the weakness? And I say weakness with quotations around it because it's not like a weakness that Akron has. It's a weakness that like an elite team has. They just don't have the experience. Keely Ringo, a bunch of those guys, they have great players. But we feel this front 7, they can mask that against some of these great teams to the point where you get to a team like Florida or a team specifically like Alabama in the SEC title game, if that happens, or Ole Miss, I'll throw that in there, that can throw the ball over the yard. That's when that could become an issue. But this front 7 for Georgia is lethal.
I mean, I just – Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, Jordan Davis, N'Kobe Dean. I mean, those guys are just tearing up offenses right now. And I think Nolan Smith, to me, if you're asking me the question right now, who is the best defensive player in the SEC? It has to be Nolan Smith. And as much as I say Jordan Davis is so good and so electric as a defensive tackle, Nolan Smith's doing things that I don't think anyone really realized he could do until this year, maybe toward the end of last year. But Georgia's defense is going to be okay. Like you said, there are some weaknesses in the secondary. They're going to figure those out. Kirby's a great coach. He's got even better coaches. I love the picture I sent you today of Kirby on the sideline with Will Muschamp right behind him. What a weird duo, honestly, for me. Overall, their defense is very good. They're very talented. You got 4 and 5 stars out there. They're playing for a reason. Kirby believes that they can be the best that they can be at all times. He wouldn't play them if they weren't. But yeah, I think the defensive line, honestly, the front 7 they'll answer those questions if Georgia's defense is elite. If you don't think that they're elite, look at the front 7, look what they can do during a whole game. it's unbelievable. And they got people who rotate in there who are just as talented. So
Ralph, I'm looking right now. The team through now. Let's get this right. The team through 3 games has 13 sacks.
Well,
exactly. 2.5 from your man Nolan Smith. 1.5 from Jordan Davis. Remind you, he is a freak of nature. Trevon Walker with 1. Nakobe Dean, Ralph, who dominated against Clemson, has 2. Adam Anderson with 3. I mean, what was Shane Beamer? They've got about 105 stars. So what do you expect? I mean, they have 5 stars all over the field. Now, they don't have 100, but Ralph, this is a team that's very talented. It's shaping up college football to be fantastic. And Ralph, you know what goes great with college football? Do you know? Some great gear.
Yeah.
Some great gear.
That's how I was answering with it.
Presented by Section 103. That's a great sponsor of the show. We have, obviously, for Georgia Tech fans and more coming, some favorite comfortable gear for you. Georgia Tech almost pulled off the upset. And what a better way to support your local brand. From a Georgia Tech grad himself, you can get that ATL logo. It's a fantastic logo. The only place you can get it, as well as the GT. Ralph's got that shirt on the left, the dry fit gold one. I've got that hoodie coming as well. Welcome to ATL as well. It's a fantastic look. We are so proud and so excited that they are sponsoring the show as well as our Georgia Tech segment that we have on Tuesday nights. Ralph, any final thoughts from you here? College football as a whole, we're going to learn a lot here in the next 3 to 4 weeks. You might see some separation. The big boys from the smaller ones. Listen, they always say when it comes time to put the pads on, well, conference play is about to start, and we're going to figure out who's the men amongst the boys here in the next couple of weeks.
I just want to say one thing, and you mentioned it earlier. Shout out to the Detroit Trojans. A huge win on the road, allowing only -1 rushing yards.
That's pretty
great
good.
Defense, great defensive play. I finally been asking if the defense could play for Troy. They did. Offensive played well. Overall, they stopped Frank Gorge Jr., who is the running back for Southern Miss. They're only 15 carries to 31 yards. Troy looked good, and they got a pretty tough schedule coming up for them. You know, they travel to South Carolina in 2 weeks, or actually they get a week off this. They have ULM this weekend, and then they go to South Carolina, which to me, and I've been saying it all year, this could be the game that Troy wins another Power 5 conference win. So.
It'd be what, 3 Power 5 wins in the past 7 years?
Yes.
That's pretty good if you ask me. Mm-hmm. We thank you so much for tuning in. Obviously, it's been a fun show. We've talked a lot about college football. Tomorrow night, tune in if you're a Georgia Tech fan. I know we had a couple watching right now. For Swarm Talk, we're going to have special guest Taquan Marshall, and we're going to recap. We're going to look at some of the film. Yeah, we're going to dive in some of the film from Georgia Tech, Clemson, and what the Jackets have to do because, listen, they've got to turn around and play North Carolina in the Benz this weekend. It's going to be a fun show. And then, obviously, Wednesday, we're going to take a look as well at what's coming up in college football this weekend. We're also, Ralph, going to take a look at what the Bravos got to do. They're about to have first pitch in about an hour here, hour and a half. They're 2 games up on the Phillies. Stressful times, but, hey, it's a fun time to be a sports fan, especially here in the state of Georgia, unless you are a Falcons fan. So long, we say thank you for Ralph and Bryce, for everyone involved. So thank you to our sponsors as well. Visit us at The Crowded Booth on all your social media sites and thecrowdedbooth.com. We are out.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on.